few months ago I bought my first gimbal, and literally 2 or 3 days after receiving the gimbal in the post, I got that frustrated with it. I just thought it took up too much time and took away from actual filmmaking that I just got fed up with it and decided to send it back. Now I've rebought the gimbal, the Zhiyun Weebill S. I love this thing. So in this video, I thought it would be a good idea to look at a few reasons as to why you do need a gimbal to improve your videos. Let's get into it. Just before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, my name is Scott Edwards. I make all sorts of video, photography, vlog and tech related videos, so if they are the sorts of things you are interested in, consider clicking that little subscribe button just down below there and come and be a part of this community. The first reason is obviously the most obvious reason as to why you should buy a gimbal, and that is nice, smooth, cinematic shots. Everyone wants to create nice, smooth, cinematic shots that look pleasing to the eye when they are making their videos, and a gimbal is one way you can help to get closer to that desired look. Now, a gimbal is effectively a camera stabilizer, and when you use it correctly, you can get some incredible looking shots. However, when you use it wrong, when you don't really think about what you are trying to achieve, you can get some dreadful looking stuff as well. So if you are going to use a gimbal, really think about the shots you are trying to achieve and plan them out beforehand. I really have no idea how these gimbals work. There must be some like wizardry going on inside it or something like that, because it is insane. When you look at some of these shots that I got of Holly rollerblading, there is no way that you will be able to do this handheld. Absolutely no way at all. If you were using the camera handheld, it would be so shaky and almost unusable if you were just running behind someone with a camera. Now, when you're using your gimbal, you still need to be as steady as you possibly can when you are moving along with the gimbal and the camera, but it makes such a huge difference. And what you can then do as well is if you've still got a little bit of movement, because for example with a gimbal there's no up or down axis, so you can still get the up and down movement. If you have a lot of that, what you can then do is in Final Cut or Adobe Premiere, whichever you use, you can then add a warp stabilizer, and that will then again just take out all of the movement, and it looks so stable. It is incredible. Now, you could use a warp stabilizer with just handheld footage, but they don't work as well because if your camera's shaky, it's got a lot more work to do. However, if you've already taken most of the shake out of your footage with the gimbal, adding the warp stabilizer after is just incredible. It looks so smooth. It makes me question as to why I decided to send it back in the first place when I first bought it. Now, the second reason you should consider buying a gimbal to improve your videos is it will help you get out of those high frame rates. If you are only shooting all of your footage handheld, what you tend to do is if you want nice smooth footage, you tend to shoot in a higher frame rate. So my camera, for example, shoots in 120 frames a second. That means that you can then slow it right down and it gives you nice, smooth, slow motion. Now that is great. It looks absolutely brilliant, and you can get some really effective shots using slow motion. I still use it all the time. But what if you wanted to do something slightly different? What if you wanted to shoot a talking headshot with someone walking along and you needed that nice natural motion blur? You needed to shoot in 25 frames a second. If you were to do that just handheld, it's not gonna look great because your camera, even though you're trying your best to hold it still, it's still gonna be shaking around. Using a gimbal just opens up a whole new world of possibilities, because you can then lower your frame rate to 25 frames a second and not have to worry about all that handheld shaky footage. Now, I'm not saying don't shoot in 120 frames slow motion. I'm not saying that at all. Still do all of that because it looks incredible. I've used it in some of this video at the beginning as well, and I absolutely love it. You don't want to be doing that all the time, because looking at 120 frames a second slow motion all the time, it just gets a little bit linear and and a little bit all samey. So you need to mix up your frame rates to get a more dynamic looking video and to help keep the viewer's attention for longer. By sticking your camera in a gimbal, you can put your camera in 25 frames a second, film what you want and not have to worry about it until you get into Final Cut, where you may want to, as I mentioned before, add a little bit of a warp stabilizer, but that's not necessarily essential. But being able to mix up your frame rates between 120 frames, 50 frames, 25 frames, whatever frame rate you shoot in, to be able to mix them up is key to getting a much more dynamic video and improving the quality of your videos and overall improving the watch time and engagement on your video, because it's much more interesting to watch. And the third reason is it opens up a whole new world of possibilities, for example with long sweeping shots. Because the footage you are shooting using a gimbal is much more stable and much more usable, you therefore have the facility to be able to go out and record much longer clips. Now if you're shooting handheld, what you might find is sometimes you'll have to cut a clip short when you come into editing because part of it is unusable because you've tripped or something like that and you've ended up getting a big shake in your footage and that ruins that clip. Using a gimbal, that is going to take out the majority of those shakes, therefore you are going to be able to follow someone walking along and it's going to look much more cinematic, it's going to look much more pleasing to the eye, and you will have far more footage that you are able to use. It opens up entirely new possibilities to your filmmaking and your production, whether you're shooting with other people or even just on your own. Now yes, it's a completely different way of filming. It's not as run and gun as handheld and not as instant because you've got to balance it, you've got to unpack it, you've got to stick your camera on there. It does take a little bit of time, so it is a completely different way of filming. But if you know what you're doing, you know the shots that you want to try and achieve, you've got them all written down in a bit of a shot list, or you've got an idea in your head of what you are trying to achieve and create, you are going to have so much fun using something like this, and the possibilities are absolutely endless. Look at the film 1917 for example. I'm not saying they shot all of that on one gimbal like this with a mirrorless camera and a small handheld gimbal. They used a lot of expensive filmmaking gear, a hell of a lot of expensive filmmaking gear to film that film, and it almost looks like they shot all of that film in one take. Now there's a lot of very clever camera work going on in that film, but they used nice stable footage, and when it came to editing it, they could stitch it all together to make it look like one long sequence. Using a gimbal gives you the option and facility to be able to do similar things. Now yes, I'm not saying you can go out and make a Hollywood blockbuster movie like that, but you have the possibilities to be able to go out and create something along those lines. It is absolutely insane. I love this thing. So there we go, 3 reasons as to why you should use a gimbal to improve your videos. Now I'm not saying in this video don't ever shoot handheld. I'm not saying that. You should always still use handheld shots, because as with mixing up frame rates, as I mentioned before, between 120 slow-mo and 25 frames a second to create a dynamic video and increase your engagement and interest in the video with people watching, you also don't want to make everything nice and stable and just a bit wishy-washy. You can still use handheld footage very effectively, and I would highly recommend doing that as well. So that is something that I'm going to try and do in my next few videos. Just try and use the gimbal effectively, but still use handheld shots as well, because you don't want everything to look like it's just very flat and linear, a bit like it would if you shot everything in 120 and slowed it down into slow motion. So definitely still use some handheld footage in your videos, because it can look very good. It's just a little bit harder sometimes. That's where the gimbal comes in. So let me know if you have any other reasons as to why you think you should use a gimbal to improve your videos. Let me know in the comments below. Let me know what gimbals you use as well. I'm massively into this at the moment, so be interesting to know. Come and say hello, give this video a thumbs up, click subscribe just down below there. Come and be a part of this community, and I shall see you all very soon in another video. I mean, how do they work? It's just ridiculous. Look at that. It's mad. Wizardry.